Hey Messiah, we're keeping our community strong by staying connected to one another and connected to Jesus. Today's video devotion comes to us from Becky Gill.
Hello, Messiah. Today's devotion comes from Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. And this takes place right after Jesus has kind of called the 12 disciples to follow him. They've been touring around a little bit, preaching to crowds, things like the parable of the sower and the parable of the mustard seed. And after all this teaching and public ministry, Jesus takes the disciples across the Sea of Galilee in a boat. And of course, it's a pretty famous story where Jesus falls asleep in this boat and the disciples start to freak out when a huge storm comes up, which is pretty common on this particular body of water. And they are worried that they're going to drown. And eventually they finally wake Jesus up, get a little irritated with him, and say, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown here?" Now, Jesus, of course, gets up. He doesn't grab a bucket and start bailing water out or, start looking for a place to steer the boat and land carefully. He just stands up, says, "Silence, be still." And of course, we know the waves and the wind all stopped and they were safe. Now, the thing that's always a little bit irked to me about this passage is Jesus' response then to the disciples, because he says, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And to me, I kind of sympathize with the disciples here, right? They're in a strange situation, in a very dangerous situation with this man. They haven't been following Jesus that long. They've seen him do miraculous things, but nothing that would make them think, okay, he's going to just calm the storm here. They felt like he should at least be awake and helping as their leader instead of just snoring away in the back of the boat. I think I sympathize because I maybe have this attitude a lot in life, like when there's tough stuff, like when all this pandemic things hit, my first response is come up with a plan, what's our 14 days worth of meals and our grocery list to make sure we're good, what's what emails do I need to add to the church directory email list, and how do we just get this going and safe again and predictable. And so the disciples responded with action and got a little bit irritated that Jesus wasn't helping them. And I think I sympathize with that feeling of frustration with God too sometimes. I realized after a couple of weeks of planning and organizing and just trying to get pandemic life figured out, I started feeling pretty dry and frustrated with God and wondering where he was in the midst of it all. And so I've had to take some time to try to process that a little bit. Now, the other funny thing that I like about this passage is that at the very end, it seems like the disciples are almost more scared than they were in the middle of the storm, because the final verse says the disciples were absolutely terrified after Jesus calmed the storm and said, "Who is this man? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Because Jesus had the big picture in mind, right? He knew that he wasn't going to die in the lake that day because he had to die on a cross in a little while. Ultimately, those disciples were going to die with Jesus, but they weren't going to drown. They were going to, most of them, be martyred after they had the big picture. They had the Easter story, and they were going to share that with people and join Jesus in his resurrection eventually. So a couple of things I wanted to reflect on today. One is, are you feeling distant or maybe irritated a little bit with God at all right now? There's so much chaos and change. And I know as good Christians, sometimes it's easy to sort of push down any feelings of frustration and "Jesus, why are you asleep right now?" But is there anywhere in your life that you're feeling that or wrestling with that? And if so, I want to encourage you to just spend some time listening to Jesus, talking to Jesus, sharing those feelings, and letting him show you where he is at work and give you that big Easter picture story to reflect on and have that little grain of mustard seed faith that you need to continue in your walk with him. Let's pray. Jesus, we thank you for the fact that you knew the full story, that you even know our full story today. And we ask that you will give us the little bit of faith that we need to trust you in that in uncertain times. Amen.